This is Lisa from Marvel Tech Review, and it's that time of year. It's Surface Pro time. This time we're up to Surface Pro 4. No kidding, it's the best Surface Pro model yet, but how much better is it? We're going to find out in this review. And we've got two different models right here to test. We have the Core i5 with the 8 gigs of RAM and the 256 gig SSD. That's the $1,300 model, not including the keyboard, still priced separately, that keyboard. And we have the Core M3 model, the least expensive, $899. It has 4 gigs of RAM, 128 gig SSD. And we're going to find out just how different they are too, because I know a lot of you are tempted not just by the price, but how much quieter the Core M just might be, but how much performance you're giving up. We'll find that out too. And we've got a bunch of accessories here. In case you haven't seen it, you can buy the new Surface Pro 4 and Surface Book compatible pen right here. Backward compatible too, and it comes with the 5 extra nibs in the box. You can just buy those nibs separately too if you want the different kind of, well, possible pointers on there. Here we have the two chargers. Interesting, first off, just to show you the difference in size with these two. This is the standard one for the Core i5 model, and this is the one for the Core M. It is a smaller one with the little prongs on it, like so. No USB charger on the side right there. That's because Core M doesn't need as much power to charge even, so that's why there's a difference in the chargers that you get there. And lastly, we have the new Surface dock, works with the Surface Book as well as the Surface Pro 3 and the Surface Pro 4. Connects to the pogo pin magnetic charging connector on the Surface, and it gives you 2 USB ports in the front, and on the back here 2 more USB ports, 2 mini display ports. In theory, able to drive 2 4K displays. I say in theory because it's been kind of quirky and buggy so far trying to get 2 of those to work at once and stay consistent. And we have Ethernet and an audio jack right there, and it also charges your Surface. So we're going to look at all this stuff now and discover what's new about Surface Pro 4. So here it is, Surface Pro 4 by Microsoft. The certainly unique looking tablet I think everybody can recognize the Surface at this point. It's the thing that gets you noticed at Starbucks along with the usual MacBook Pro, right? So we've got the cyan type cover on here. The latest generation of type cover, still $129. You're going to have to add that onto the price of your Surface Pro 4. Everybody gives Microsoft a hard time for that because I think most people do buy it, especially because it also acts as a convenient cover for the product so you can carry it around and protects it. Available in several different colors. I like the cyan one, but you can get stately black if you want. There's hunter green. There's a variety of colors. Red. And for $159, you can get one with the fingerprint scanner. Speaking of that sort of stuff, it supports all sorts of nifty logins, pin-based logins, and Windows Hello. It uses the front 5-megapixel camera to take a look at you, recognize you, and log you in without having to type anything in at all or swipe your finger, which is pretty darn handy, and it works really surprisingly well. Even in dark rooms, I've had it recognize me, and I wear glasses, and they say, hey, you might have problems if you have glasses. Maybe you should take them off, because apparently all these facial recognition things focus on your eyes. We have 2 versions here because this is the interesting one for some folks who have been bothered by heat and noise in the Surface Pro lineup. Now, first off, Microsoft with their new hybrid cooling has done a whole lot to improve that. Now, I know some of you out there who have gotten your Surface Pro 4s already have had some heat and noise issues, and I think a lot of that's related perhaps to the Edge browser, which is also famous for the sudden color temperature changes when scrolling, particularly on forums and on any page that has video on it. These are software bugs. Don't worry. Don't return your Surface Pro 4 if you notice the color temperature changing while you're scrolling in a web browser. Anyway, ours has been awfully quiet and awfully cool. The fan will come on if you're doing something, running benchmarks, of course, which is something we do a lot of. If you're playing Civ 5, which indeed I did on this, or if you're exporting video in something like Premiere Pro, you'll hear it, but instead of sounding like a little baby vacuum cleaner, it's much quieter. It's not intrusive. People won't give you a dirty look and ask you to leave the room or turn up the TV because they just can't hear anything. Way better. The back will get warm on these with average use. If you're really pushing it hard, and really honestly, gaming is the thing I find will get the hottest of all. It'll get pretty toasty on the back. Not burning hot, not as hot as the last Surface Pro. And they did, with their hybrid design, they did design it so that the heat would be spread across the area instead of having one single hotspot, and it gets the job done. That said, our Core M3 here, the lower power model, is a little bit cooler in the back. If you're really pushing it hard, now this one isn't my first pick for gaming. Of course, none of these really are designed for gaming, but let's face it, we do that. It'll still get pretty warm on the back, but it's silent, which is awfully nice. You would think battery life would be super duper better with this, but funny thing about the Core M series is the battery life has never been as over-the-top great as we might have hoped, because the Core M is a 4.5 watt CPU versus the usual 15 watt Ultrabook CPU used in the Core i5 and of course the Core i7 models. They're all dual core CPUs no matter which one you get. And yes, it's true with the Core i5 and the Core i7. And even the Core M, because it's really performed pretty well in synthetic benchmarks and been more usable in everyday life than previous Core M's that we've tested. It's an Ultrabook, basically, in a tablet form factor, so it's quite powerful. It could be your main machine in terms of power. Now, in terms of ergonomics, this is a 12.3-inch display, up 0.3 inches from the Surface Pro 3. They didn't have to really increase the size of the casing here. What they did is they reduced the size of the bezels to increase that. So it also depends, are you comfortable using a 12.3-inch display on your main machine? Of course, it has a mini display port on it, so you could plug in an external monitor if you wanted, or use that dock that we showed you at the beginning to plug in a bunch of USB peripherals pretty conveniently at the same time as well. The display resolution has increased from Surface Pro 3. We're now up to 2,736 by 1824 pixels. Still a 3:2 aspect ratio, which is a great aspect ratio because if you want to hold this in portrait mode, well, it's pretty usable like this. It doesn't seem so very tall and narrow. Magnetic attachment for the pen, notice right here, and it's a pretty strong magnet. You can knock it off if you pick it up. It's not impossible to do that, but it's stronger than the Vio Canvas Z's magnet, certainly, which I think is why the Vio Canvas Z included a little plastic clip, because they knew it didn't really work so well. Along the bottom here, we have the mating connector for the dock. No surprise. There's where our charger goes in, or you can plug in the dock there if you want. The usual cutout, so you can open the flap for the kickstand. The industrial design really hasn't changed much here. The ventilation holes along the side, your single mini display port, your single USB 3.0 port. So a little bit port constrained, but then again, it has more ports than Surface Book display section by itself solo. Your volume and your power controls are up the top now. Headphone jack is on this side. And underneath the pen, there's a whole lot of nothing except for the magnetic area and another pull-down spot. And if you pull down the kickstand, just as before, infinite positions going along here wherever you want, nice and stiff. I mean, I'm banging this thing and it's not wobbling. So if you hate those 2-in-1s that tend to wobble, this is not going to be one of them. And we have the micro SD card. It's underneath the flap right over here. As ever, ergonomically speaking, it is great to use as a tablet. I mean, you can do something like this. This is the maximum extension right here, and that's a great angle for working, writing, all of that sort of thing. The display angles on the PixelSense display, very good. It's a very good quality IPS display. In fact, 99% of sRGB, 75% of Adobe RGB, so that puts it up there with the top Ultrabooks. That's pretty typical. We don't have full Adobe RGB coverage here, but hey, can only hope for so much. We measured 387 nits of brightness on this unit. This is not the brightest desktop pattern right here, so you might not guess it, but it's quite bright. Pricing, as you might know, starts at $899. That is for the Core M3, which is the lowest end version that has 4 gigs of RAM, 128 gig SSD. Gone is that 64 gig SSD configuration, thank gosh, because you still install Windows on there and a few core programs and you're already getting tight for space. The Core i5 with 4 gigs of RAM and 128 gig SSD is $999. The model that we have goes up to 8 gigs of RAM and 256 gig SSD. It's $1,300. There will be Core i7 models and Core i7 even with Intel Iris Pro 540 graphics not available yet. That will be an interesting one to test because that will have faster integrated graphics than the integrated graphics that are on Surface Book even. And it won't be faster most likely than the NVIDIA dedicated GPU option on a Surface Book, but that should be the most sprightly, potentially the hottest and the noisiest too. But like I said, I'm pretty positive about that given how much cooler and quieter this one has been. Pricing can get pretty crazy if you go up to that. So let's take a look at a Core i7 with 256 gig and 16 gigs of RAM, and you can see that that one is $1,800. Right there, 8 gigs of RAM, $1,599. You get the idea. Not cheap by any means, never has been. Pricing is pretty much the same tiered pricing they use with Surface Pro 3. It is cheaper than Surface Book, however. And we're going to have a separate smackdown between this and Surface Book, so have no fear. unless you go for that Iris Pro model when it's available, or the Core M3. The Core M3 has Intel integrated graphics. That is 515 graphics. Otherwise, you're going to have the usual 520 graphics, which is standard with the Core i5 and Core i7 base models on this, and then other Ultrabooks that are coming out, or tablets, depending on how you want to look at it. Speaking of tablet, this is how convenient the cover is. For those of you who are kind of new to Surface Book, this is what it looks like if you're going to be carrying it around. It's very easy to stow anywhere. It weighs 1.73 pounds, a teeny bit less, like 1.69 pounds if you go for the Core M model, 8.45 millimeters thick, so it's pretty thin. That's a third of an inch. It is a pleasure to take with you. So if extreme portability is important to you, yet you need some good horsepower, typical of an Ultrabook, this would still be one of the top picks. Of course, HP and Lenovo are going to have some models to compete with this, and we'll review those too. So let's talk about that Core M3 versus Core i5-6300U, all Skylake generation CPUs. The base clock rate is going to sound horrifyingly low to you on the Core M3, and by the way, M5 and M7s exist in Intel's lineup, but just not in the Surface lineup. The base clock rate is 900 megahertz, but the Core M is a little bit different. It doesn't spend a whole lot of time at its base clock rate. The Turbo Boost Max is 2.2 gigahertz, and typically ours was running at about 1.5 gigahertz. So that's how Core M manages to save some power. It can, in theory, drop down really low if possible, but it can scale up a lot more aggressively than a Core i5 or Core i7 are going to. The Core i5's base clock rate is 2.4 gigahertz. Of course, it has turbo boost too, to much higher. Again, 4.5 watts versus 15 watts on those, the difference in integrated graphics. No matter which way you go, you're going to get a PCIe SSD. Again, if you think you need more than 4 gigs of RAM, the Core M isn't going to be for you because you can only get it with 4 gigs of RAM, whereas you can get it with 8 or 16 even on the Core i5 and Core i7 models. With the Surface Pro 4, as always, the thing is just about impossible to open up. You're not going to be doing upgrades yourself, so no, the RAM is soldered on anyway. The SSD, you could in theory upgrade if you could get inside, but that involves pulling the display off and all sorts of stuff, so get it with what you think you're going to need inside. All Surface Pro models have the updated N-Trig digitizer inside that supports 1024 levels of pressure sensitivity, and there's supposed to be a greater hover range. It is a little bit farther. I can get it about out to about 3/4 of an inch with the pen, but reliably it's more like a half an inch. I'd like to see even more because it's important for palm rejection, because the tablet has to see the pen first, and you'll see the little cursor there, and then you know it's safe to rest your hand on the glass because it's going to pay attention to the pen and then ignore your palm. Not quite there yet. The drawing experience is more pleasant. It feels more fluid, and we're using the Core M model right here, so this will be the slower one too in terms of performance. It feels more fluid, it feels more silky, like the ink is just flowing. In part, that's the nice new pen with the rubbery tip that doesn't make a whole lot of noise. It's just a soft thump. That makes a difference. This pen you can buy and you can use with the old Surface Pro 3 if you want to. So anyway, let's see how it tracks here. Speeds are just fine. And again, this is the Core M model. And I see occasionally it's missing a little bit of a track there. So if you're doing wicked fast drawing, obviously you might want the faster CPU. If you're doing things like giant brush widths, which tend to be very difficult, a lot of airbrushing, you still might want the Core i5 if you're an artist. Now, in terms of pen jitter, it's still there. Parallax I find very good. The tip is pretty much right where it should be on the glass, but slow diagonal lines, there's still a little bit of jitter there. And I know on a piece of paper I could draw a less squiggly version of that line. When you go fast, it's very straight. So that's where we are with this N-Trig digitizer and jitter. And once again, we're using our Core M3 model right here, this time with Painter 2016. And we have a almost 400 pixel wide airbrush set, which we use the same test on Surface Book to show the computational power here, because that's a lot for it to think about, using an absolutely humongous brush, especially when you're using the airbrush. And it's taking it a while to actually fill in. It's a little hard to see the dots right there. And it's still thinking about it. Then let's switch over to the oil brush. So this is going to give you an idea if you're an art person, if you can actually make do with the Core M. All right, now we have an artist bristle oil. See the delay there? Now that not everybody's going to use a huge brush like that, but that's one of the tests to see how fast it can compute and fill in. So a little bit slow there. Also, the program takes longer to load. It's interesting. It's not because the storage is different, because it's not. It's actually just the amount of CPU time that it takes. So we're going to do the same thing on the Core i5 to see what the difference in performance is. All right, here we go again. Painter 2016, a 2000 by 1000 pixel canvas. We have an airbrush that is 400 pixels in width. And it is keeping up a bit better. I know airbrushes are a little bit faint, but let's see if it does a lot of after drawing afterwards. And it updates over here a lot quicker. Now we'll switch over to the oil brush, which is easier to see. And now we've switched over to a 400 pixel wide oil bristle brush. See how it fills in much more quickly there? Not the delay that we saw drawing quite as much, just still a slight bit. If you really can't handle that, then there is always the Vio Z canvas, which is the most wickedly fast among all of these current generation tablets that are available. So there you see an experiential difference if you're an artist. Now, both of these machines are quite fast enough if you want to do MS Office, the occasional Photoshop, even more than occasional, pretty frequent Photoshopping, even with big raw images, say 24 megapixel camera, 36 megapixel camera even. Streaming video, hobbyist use of video editing software, yes, you can. Although, even for hobbyist use, if it's 1080 or 4K video, you still want the Core i5 or the Core i7, not the Core M. They're powerful enough to be your main machine. But this is for those of you who do some heavy lifting. I know those of you do. Those of you who are compiling code, you're doing making software programs, that sort of thing, you're still going to want the Core i5, Core i7. And we're going to put up a comparison table so you can see how they score on several popular benchmarks and see the difference between them. And also we're going to put up a comparison graph that includes both Surface Pro 4 models and the Surface Book and the Vio Z canvas as a graph, so you can see how they compare to each other. So how about speakers? Well, they've definitely improved this too. Surface Pro really just keeps getting better every year when it comes to speaker quality. So we're going to play our Surface first look video here. This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and good times. A lot of neat products coming down the pipeline, but right now we're going to take a first look at Microsoft's Surface Book and Microsoft Surface Pro 4, the latest Microsoft tablets that are hitting for the late fall. So that is pretty darn good for multimedia. The speakers are certainly adequate. Of course, you have the headphone jack if you want to do something better. You could use Bluetooth speakers as well with this. Definitely an improvement there. Battery life, however, not so much of an improvement. Skylake should be more power frugal, but you know, the design is not getting any thicker to accommodate a battery. And say it's supposed to give you 5% to 10% better battery life. And meanwhile, we're driving more pixels on this display than the one we had last year, aren't we? So guess what? The battery life works out about the same 6.5 hours on average for charge. And that's at 50% brightness, which is very bright already, given how bright this display is. And doing mixed productivity work in MS Office, social networking, emails, playing a few YouTube videos, you get the idea there, and doing a little drawing in an art program. If you're going to be using this for playing games or for working with video rendering and export, expect shorter runtime. So not as long as Surface Book, but it's usable. It's not so different from a lot of Ultrabooks that are on the market when it comes to 6.5 hours, but it's just not going to beat the long runners on the market, which would be the Dell XPS 13 1080p edition. Not fair, it only has 1080p, or the 13-inch Retina MacBook Pro, which is a completely different OS with great optimizations. What can you do there? All right, let's talk bugs. Now, why am I holding the dock? Well, I say that. Well, the dock is a lovely $199 accessory, weighted, rubbery. It's just not going to go anywhere in your desk. Comes with a charger too, bigger charger than you might expect. This is about the same size as the dock right there. So you get a second charger, which is nice. Anyway, this gives you USB ports up the wazoo. 2 in the front, you got 2 more on the back. You got 2 display ports. You have your Ethernet and your 3.5 millimeter audio. Not bad for $199 actually. 2 display ports, Microsoft says this can drive 2 4K displays. It's been kind of quacky so far trying to do that, though. Sometimes it seems like the display settings just reset themselves. I don't know if it's a Windows bug with different aspect ratios, because of course the tablet itself is 3:2. Most monitors are 16:9 widescreen. It's hard to find a 3:2 4K monitor on the market. Anyway, it's a little quirky. Other quirks include both the Surface Pro 4 and the Surface Book. Display driver crashes. You'll get the screen will just go completely black for a minute, and then the display driver recovers, and then you finally see the display again, hopefully. And you'll get a little message that says the display driver has crashed, or the graphics driver disconnect and reconnect, which is a little bit annoying, to say the least. Now, I'm sure we're going to see a fix for this. This is a software or a firmware issue, and Microsoft will fix it, but be warned, it seems like every Surface product when it first comes out, it has its kinks and its bugs. Now, Surface Book for me was even buggier, because that's really a Gen 1 product, isn't it? Well, this is a 4th generation. So, and the other major bug that I noted was the color shifts that you'll see in Microsoft's Edge web browser. You know, Edge is just... it's great because it handles scaling nicely. It does some things pretty well, but it's also sometimes just a little quirky and not ready for prime time. Anyway, if you see those color shifts when you're scrolling, it won't happen on our website, but it happens on some that are loaded heavily with ads and video and all that sort of thing. Don't worry, your machine's not broken, and Microsoft will eventually figure it out and have a fix for that too. So Surface Pro 4, like all Surfaces, is, you know, always a bit of an early adopter kind of product, but it's still a very solid product. I wouldn't let those bugs scare you away. Microsoft will iron them out. It's not the end of the world, but it's the fastest. It has the best display of any Surface yet. The Type Cover 4, which of course you can get and use on your Surface Pro 3, is certainly the most improved yet. It's very, very rigid. It's an island-style keyboard. Nice key travel, 1.4 millimeters. Backlit as always. Much improved trackpad that's reaching up there with the quality of the Mac trackpad. It's just very good for 2-finger scrolling, all that sort of thing. It's a darn good tablet if a tablet is what you're looking for that can also be your laptop in a pinch. So that's Microsoft's Surface Pro 4, the 4th generation, obviously Microsoft's Surface Windows tablet running full Windows, and the second one to have a larger display instead of the original 10.8-inch, for example. Is it the best yet? It certainly is. If you have a Surface Pro 3, I don't know if you want to spend the money to upgrade, but if you're coming from something like a Pro 2 and you do want the bigger screen, particularly, yes, it's definitely the fastest yet, but not by a huge amount. It is quieter and cooler, and I know that's important to a lot of folks because the Surface Pro 3 could sound a little bit like a vacuum cleaner when you were pushing it hard. And beyond that, the type cover for the Surface Pro 4 also is backward compatible with Surface Pro 3. So it's a great cover, but you can just buy this cover too and not have to upgrade the whole tablet. But that said, if you don't have one yet, it's definitely the one to get. The Surface Pro 4 is faster, thinner, lighter, better, and all of that sort of good stuff. The latest Skylake generation CPUs there. We wish that they had improved battery life more markedly on this. I guess we can't have everything unless they make the casing bigger in this case. Anyway, still an awesome tablet from Microsoft. Give it a thumbs up. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to visit our website for the full written reviews and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Lots more cool content coming for the rest of 2015.